Welcome to the channel. So my most recent modification to the 4runner has been the addition of 35-inch tires. So in today's video, I just wanted to go over a few things on how I made 35s fit on a 4runner. All right, so you're thinking, I want to put 35s on my 4runner. What do I got to do? Well, besides hacking away at the fenders, there's a few other things you should consider. One of them is re-gearing. It's going to cost you a little bit of money. It's going to cost the cost of the gear kit, install kit, and labor to get them installed, but it's totally worth it. Here I have 488 gears that were installed front and rear. And then if they already have the differential open, might as well throw a front locker if you're going to get really hardcore off-roading. So I got an ARB air locker up front, powered by the ARB dual compressor. So in this video, I really just wanted to show, what you have to do to trim for 35s, because it's a really big tire and the 4runner is not meant for 35s from the factory. Some of the other things I've done, I have the Fox 2.5 suspension installed in the front, and it's about 2.5, 3 inches of lift in the front to clearance the 35s. And in the rear, I had to install, well, I'm gonna get a new bumper in the future, so I installed 3-inch Icon coils in the rear to give it a little more clearance. So the rear is pretty good. The rear doesn't rub much. So in this video, we'll focus mostly on what we need to do to trim the front fenders to fit 35s. Before we get into cutting, I just wanted to show right under here in the front, when you reverse, it makes a terrible grinding noise. So we'll just go over that real quick. Okay, so here's a look at the wheel well with the fender. Right here, you can kind of see along the line, I'll zoom in a little bit, where the 35-inch tire is rubbing on the fender. There's a little bit, like right here at the top. I'll give you some photos of that as well. But we're gonna have to trim out a little bit. What I had done, they smashed back the pinch weld and did the body mount chop. I also got the spindles gusseted. So I'll take off the tire and then show you guys what all that looks like. Okay, so this is what it looks like with the wheel and tire off. Trail4runner.com has an article about how to trim the entire wheel well for 35s. He ends up going around the outside, trimming the entire trim piece and then cutting the inner fender as well. I kind of want to try and just do like as minimal as possible, so I'll cut a little section here. I'll try and cut a little bit here, and then in the front I'll have to trim some too for when I back up the tires rubbing a little bit on the front. In the front, I'm eventually gonna do a Viper cut because I have the C4 front bumper, so the front won't even matter. Here you can see that I've got this pinch weld smashed down, so it gives a little bit more clearance here as well. I might have to keep going up to here and just remove this outer fender liner. And then the body mount chop done. You can see the spindle, they've been gusseted. It was just a good idea to put the spindle gussets on with 35s. I've seen enough articles of people with actually bent or broken spindles when they wheel pretty hard with 35s, so I just wanted to avoid that completely. So I'll do a little trimming and kind of go a little at a time and show you guys what it looks like and see if it's enough and show you what it's like to put 35s on. Another thing I wanted to point out is when the fender rubs, or when the tire rubs on the fender here, it actually pushes the fender out a little bit. If you can see, it's not flush with the body line. You can kind of push it in a little bit to fix the body line. So I'm gonna have to come down here underneath this little cap and push it in just a little bit. Okay, so here's a little after. I trimmed the inner fender liner just straight across. So took this piece out. There's a couple pieces. I made a straight line from the side of the bolt to the corner of this fender, exterior fender, and took this section out here. Had the little molding cap down here, took out a section that was rubbing. This piece right here was also inside the fender cap. The bad thing is I took out one of the little clips for the fender cap. So this is a little loose right here, so I'll have to find another way to secure it. But so far, this is as far as I'm going to trim, and then I'll run it and see how much it rubs. Let's talk about the passenger side. I did, again, the same diagonal cut. I bent the fender back a little bit. I cut some of the metal off the fender here. And then on this side, because of the trim piece, I did not cut off the yellow clip. So this is still on here a little bit. I just shaved off what wasn't necessary for the yellow clip to stay on here, which I feel like this was a better way to do it. I'll just have to figure out a bracket or some other way to mount the other side over there. But so far this looks pretty good to me. Should clearance. The only thing I'm worried about is this fender right here. I might have to continue to trim the plastic fender trim piece up a little bit, but we'll start with this and keep you updated. Okay, welcome to round 2 of trimming. The first trimming that I just did was not quite enough. It's still rubbing into the fender here, up along here, up to this bolt, and then up under here. I'll show you, it actually bent the exterior trim piece right here a little bit too. So we'll take a look at that. Okay, so here's a close-up. As you can see right here, there's a little bit of a bend in the plastic when the tire contacted it, and it's still rubbing all along here, you can see, and then there's some rub marks along here still. So I'm probably just gonna take this bolt out and then come down across here. We'll probably have to trim back a little bit along this body line too. All right, that's round 2. One more place that we need to address up here in this fender area right here is actually the inner fender where the hood, underneath the hood. So right on this edge, there's kind of a 90-degree angle, and you can't really go any higher, cut that higher, and that's where the tire's rubbing as well. So what I think I'm gonna do is adjust the bump stop, just get a spacer so that it contacts further up, or it extends the bump stop down more. It'll reduce the up travel a little bit, but it won't run into the fender. Okay, so I figured the best way that we're gonna measure to see what everything clears is to swap out the suspension with the old Bilstein 5100 I have. I removed the coil from it so that I can just use the jack and cycle the suspension up and down all the way. So I'll throw the tire on, turn the wheel, rotate it, and see where it rubs and see where we need to trim. So I've compressed the shock, the suspension with the jack, and it's not quite at full compression. There's still a little gap in the top there that you can see. But over here on the side, if I've just barely turned the steering wheel to the left, and it's rubbing on the fender behind, the metal fender behind this outer cover. So we'll have to take another inch or so off of this and keep trimming. I'm gonna keep compressing the suspension and I'll show you what that looks like. Okay, so I've compressed the suspension as far as it'll go. The bump stop isn't fully compressed because the velocity isn't there when it completely shoves the tire up into the wheel well. But right now it's rubbing up here and it's rubbing a lot more on the rear. And one thing that I'm kind of surprised about is how much when the tire goes up, how far back it goes as well. It moves more of a diagonal angle than just up and down. So that's why it rubs so much in the rear. And like right now, I can barely spin the tire because there's so much rubbing going on at almost full compression. All right, so I lowered the tire and just made a little bit of measurements. I'm gonna cut just this little corner of the trim piece off and then take this whole flat edge off on the inside up to the top of that tape line, just below that bolt. And on the top, these tape aren't really there specifically other than just kind of mark where the bolts are. I'm gonna cut the whole flat section off in between these two bolts. All right, let's take a look at the cuts I made. I still need to clean it up just a little bit, but it kind of opens up right there in the fender, and then down here on the side, and then on the top, there's a gap there on the top. Okay, here's with the tire on. There is just a hair of clearance for it to rotate. I'll have to trim that up a little bit more though, just to make sure. The top has room now, but it's still, you know, once that bump stop compresses all the way, I'll probably have to clear out a little bit more. All right, so I was hoping to not have to remove the fender plastic. If you follow Trail 4runner, how they trim for 35s, he has to remove the fender plastic and then he cuts into the metal. It's much easier to cut into the metal. I was hoping I wouldn't have to remove the fender plastic, but here we are. The problem is when the plastic's on here, you can't cut the metal up high enough without maybe nicking the plastic to clear the 35s. So the only deviation, I'll leave a link in the description of how he cuts for 35s, but the only deviation is I wanted to leave as much metal as I could to leave the clips a few more mounting areas. So I cut out this section here and then this section here, but I leave all of this to help to mount in here, because really the only places that rub are back here and then up here through the top of the fender. I'll have to still cut the front, but as far as the metal goes, it's just this section right here and this section right here. One thing to note is to take off the fender, you're probably going to break a lot of these clips. These that are still on here are broken. I couldn't reach in from the inside to unclip them, so I just pulled it off. I'll leave a link in Amazon to get new clips as well. And then now I'm just gonna cut further up into the metal without this fender, and then I'll have to replace the fender at some point. So that's where I'm at so far. So here's something else to consider with taking off the fender plastic. The top edge of the fender has this sticky tape, double-sided sticky, all the way down along the body. And it's actually not that hard to get off the paint, but to get it off the fender itself is, I'm sorry, the trim piece itself is very difficult. Okay, so here's the trim piece, and I've been using a heat gun and kind of peeling it off, but because it's on the plastic, it sticks to the plastic a lot more, so it leaves more of a residue that I'm gonna have to roll off or use the heat gun and just with a plastic tool. You can't use a razor or anything like that because it'll just start cutting into the plastic trim piece. So this is something else to consider. One other thing is these two areas right here have these mounts. The problem is that I broke the mounts pulling the fender off, so I need to glue these back onto the plastic fender. So just something to keep in mind when you just rip your fenders off to trim for 35s. All right, so the final cuts that I made, everything clearance is okay with the tire all the way up here. Some of these I might have to bend these tabs in a little bit on the corners. So I'd like to keep the tabs, but the corner of it gets a little close to the tire. The other issue is the suspension is stuffed as far as it'll go, but the tire is actually contacting that inner fender that runs on the inside of the hood at that 90-degree angle. So I can't even spin the tire because it's contacting that. So that's the reason why I'll have to extend the bump stop a little bit to prevent from going all the way up into that inner fender at that 90-degree. So for now, everything looks like it should be good. I'll stop here and do the other side. I'll let it down just a little bit so we can see what that looks like as well. All right, so I let the tire down just a little bit so it spins. You can hear it rubbing on the plastic, the inner plastic, but it'll still rotate. I'll move it around. Steering wheel just a little bit. Still just the plastic on the top, but everything clearance is back here. And then obviously you still have to cut up here. I'll do that with the bumper install. So far, it looks pretty good. It's plastic. I'm okay with plastic because you're not going to be maintaining full stuff anyway, especially with the sway bars connected. So this looks good for now, and I'll move on to the other side. One last thing before we move on to the other side, I just wanted to show. So when the tire is fully turned to the left, the pinch weld that's been smashed down right here, it still rubs a little bit, and then on the tub of the body it still rubs. And then down here at the bottom, you can kind of see it's rubbing on the body mount a little bit. So I might have to get this re-chopped, but other than like tubbing, you know, with really expensive fabrication, I don't know that there's a good way to get this reduced. And it's only at full stuff too. So most of the time this won't contact, so it shouldn't be too much of an issue. All right, I have finally finished, almost. There's no project that you can do that doesn't have some hiccups. So as you can see here, this is the inner fender liner that was attached, and I didn't space the bump stops enough. I'll go over the washers that I used. I didn't space the bump stops enough, and the tire goes all the way up into that fender, the 90-degree that I was talking about, and it actually snapped off a couple of the clips and then bent this one, or just tore this one, and then just basically left the fender, inner fender hanging on my tire. So I just cut the bottom of it down there, and I was really hoping to keep this because it'll keep mud and dirt from going up into the fender, like all the way up into here. I might try and salvage this a little bit, but for now, I'm gonna run without it. The important thing though is that after I put the double-sided tape on and got new fasteners, I was able to reattach the outer trim piece. Okay, real quick, I just wanted to go over the washers that I bought to space the bump stops. They come in a pack of 10. They're 2.5 inches in diameter, and so they are the same size as the bump stop. The only thing is I had to drill out the hole to match slightly larger. I think these are drilled for 1/4 inch, but I found these on Amazon. So far I used 2 of them together, which came out to be about 1/8 of an inch. See if I can show you. Yeah, there we go. About 1/8 of an inch. That definitely was not enough. They came in a pack of 10, so what I'm going to do is add 2 more, and I'll get about 1/4 inch space for the bump stop, and if I need to, I'll just add a 5th one to each side. And that's what I did to space the bump stops. So in conclusion, I hope that you guys were able to learn a little bit. It takes a lot more work than I had anticipated. I was hoping to just have to trim just a little bit here, a little bit up here, and then be done. Some videos that I had seen prior on the internet, they smashed back the pinch weld back there, and do a little bit of trimming, but they don't take into account how far the suspension moves backwards and then how far it goes up into the fender at full articulation. So something I would do differently, if I was gonna start on a brand new 4runner, I definitely would just take this trim piece off immediately. Just start there and not even try and mess with it. You're gonna have to trim the trim piece, and then it just makes it easier to get inside the metal fender to cut all you need up in there. I would also space the bump stops a little farther. If you're not gonna be going really fast off-road, it might not be that bad, but I tend to drive a little harder, and it's shoving the tire all the way up into the fender. So it's rubbing there. If I had to do it all again, I might consider just getting fiberglass fenders, and just that way you don't have to cut into your body. You don't have to cut your Toyota up. You just replace the fender and then get it repainted. Granted, it would cost a lot more, but that's just something else to maybe consider, so you don't have to deal with all the hassle. This definitely took way longer than I expected it to, and you know, just finds like little problems along the way, little roadblocks all along the journey to try and make it work. But now it should be good. I will space out the bump stop just a little bit more, and then we'll be good to go. So I hope this video was helpful. If you like what you saw, hit the thumbs up button, and don't forget to subscribe, and I'll be making more videos in the future. So thanks for watching.